This is a panel on imperialism and anti-imperialism. And so we're going to be talking about what is internationalist socialist solidarity, okay? So maybe I should sorry. Okay. I'm just gonna put this up here. Just awkward to sit there. All right. So what is internationalist and socialist solidarity? So we're going to have 75 minutes for this session, and thankfully we do have lunch after this, so that's good because we can run over a little bit, and so we can compensate for the last 15 minutes that we lost. The idea is that each speaker will have 11 minutes to speak, and I will be timing that, if I can get everything organized. Okay. And then we estimate about 20-25 minutes for Q&A, okay? And I'm going to take stack, and please limit your comments to 90 seconds, okay? And I'll remind you of that before we start that again. So, to begin then, in light of the fate of the Syrian revolution, which has now nearly been crushed entirely by the bloody counter-revolution carried out by Bashar al-Assad, together with his Russian, Iranian, and Lebanese allies, there has been renewed debate on the global left regarding the meanings of imperialism and anti-imperialism and the political implications these carry. Many authoritarians claiming leftism cross over with the white supremacist right's open support for the Assad regime by denying its crimes and overlooking the sub-imperialist role played by Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran in Syria, focusing exclusively on the U.S.'s supposed opposition to Assad's rule. This tendency is a worrisome development, suggestive as it is of a red-brown alliance or axis that is not consistently anti-imperialist or internationalist, but rather only opposed to U.S. imperialism. It also fails analytically to see how the U.S. has increasingly accommodated Assad's ghastly victory, as reflected in Donald Trump's cutting off of the white helmets in May and his non-intervention as Assad, Russia, and Iran defeated formerly U.S.-supported Free Syrian Army units of the Southern Front, reconquering Deraa, the birthplace of the revolution, and the remainder of the Southwest last month. In stark contrast to such approaches, today we will discuss militarism and imperialism from anti-authoritarian and class framework analyses. Toward this end, I want to suggest that Black Rose Rosenegger Anarchist Federation's definition of imperialism is apt. From our point of unity on internationalism and imperialism, imperialism, quote, is a system where the state and elite classes of some countries use their superior economic and military power to dominate and exploit the people and resources of other countries, end quote. This brutal concept applies clearly to contemporary and historical global practices which, since 1492, primarily Western European and U.S. ruling classes have imposed onto much of the world, from the transatlantic slave trade, which actually this month marks 500 years since its beginning, to colonial famines, genocide, military occupation, and settler colonial regimes. Yet, more controversially, among many so-called leftists who adhere to a campist analysis, whereby the world is split up into competing military blocs, this concept of imperialism and its related concept of sub-imperialism can also be applied to the contemporary practices of the ruling classes of the so-called BRICS countries, by which I mean Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. According to Rohini Hensman in her new book, Indefensible, Democracy, Counter-Revolution, and the Rhetoric of Anti-Imperialism, she classifies the phenomenon of pseudo-anti-imperialists into three categories. Number one is the tyrants, imperialists, and war criminals who are responsible for these atrocities. Number two, the neo-Stalinists who openly support them. And number three, Orientalist so-called progressives who focus exclusively on Western imperialism to the exclusion of all other considerations, such as the agency of Middle Eastern peoples, as well as the realities of non-Western imperialism and sub-imperialism. And just for your information, sub-imperialism may not be a very familiar concept to people in the audience, so I just want to just briefly define what that is. So sub-imperialism is defined in the Marxist theory of dependency as a process whereby a dependent, within the global capitalist economy, there is the dependent and non-dependent countries, basically the exploiter and exploited countries. So sub-imperialism takes place within a dependent or subordinate country that becomes a regional sub-center. If you think, and the example that I want you to think of here is Iran, okay? So unifies different bourgeois factions by displacing internal contradictions, develops a specific national and sub-imperialist political ideological project, which in Iran you can think of maybe, Shiism, forms and advances monopolies. We have a very serious parastatal situation in Iran, and simultaneously transfers values from core imperialist countries, to core imperialist countries, while also exploiting materially and geopolitically weaker countries for the benefit of the bourgeoisie. So we see this, of course, with the oil trade, and then similarly with the intervention in Syria. So the central military roles played by Putin and the Islamic Republic in rescuing the Assad regime from defeat in the Syrian revolution, and indeed their joint responsibility for the overall murder of 200,000 civilians and the forcible disappearance of over 80,000 Syrians in this enterprise over the last 7 years, according to the findings of the Syrian Network for Human Rights, and as recently was confirmed by Assad's mass release of death notices for detainees. All of this starkly demonstrates pressing cases of imperialism and sub-imperialism on today's global stage. Yet, in contrast to the struggle between Israel and the Palestinians just across Syria's southwest border, it is apparently eminently controversial among US and Western neo-Stalinist so-called leftists to acknowledge the reactionary, authoritarian, and yes, sub-imperialist functions served by Vladimir Putin and the Islamic Republic in propping up Assad, a neo-fascist who does not just rule over a dictatorial regime, but rather heads an exterminationist state, as the Syrian communist Hussein al-Hajj Saleh observes, and as the death toll attests to. Indeed, the Russian ministry just announced on Wednesday that 63,000 Russian soldiers have fought in Syria in the past 3 years, while in June, Putin announced that Russian troops were, quote, testing and training, end quote, in Syria, so as to prevent a similar situation supposedly arising in Russia proper. And I want to ask, does this sound like Dick Cheney talking about Iraq to anyone? So, in light of the effective occupation of Syria perpetrated by Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and other Shia militias to prop up the regime, taken together with their attendant contributions to what Saleh has called the Syrian genocide, being a counterinsurgent reaction which others have termed democidal, or destroying of the people, it is my view, and I believe that of the co-panelists, my co-panelists, that several of the struggles against Assad, Putin, and the Islamic Republic of Iran form critical parts of the global anti-imperialist movement, which by definition resists militarism and regional and transnational domination and exploitation. So if human rights are the tribunal of history and their end or goal, the construction of an ethical and political utopia, these regimes, in parallel to Western imperialism, are on the wrong side of history. In accordance with the conclusion of Rohini Henson's book, democratic movements like the Iranian popular revolts of early 2018, the ongoing Ahwazi mobilizations for socio-ecological justice, those of feminists and political prisoners in all 3 countries, and Russian Antifa, among others, demand our support and solidarity as socialists. Of course, anti-imperialist forces should continue to oppose established Euro-American imperialism and settler colonialism. The main enemy is at home, as Karl Liebknecht declared in 1915, denouncing what he termed the genocide of World War I. Together with the neo-colonial crimes of allied autocracies such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE in Yemen today. Liebknecht's statement notwithstanding, we must recall that he in no way supported the Tsar or other imperialist rivals of the German state, but rather the Russian Revolution. Therefore, a truly humanist form of anti-imperialism today cannot exclude the Syrian, Russian, and Iranian regimes from critique and, it is to be hoped, support for organization toward their ultimate demise. The atrocity denialism engaged in by many self-styled progressives and leftists in the West when it comes to the Assad regime, as identified by Leila Shami and others, is abhorrent. If we really believe as internationalists and egalitarians that each human life has equal dignity and value, we must play no part in it. For our own sake and for the sake of the global revolution too, it would behoove us to examine the actual affinities between the Trump regime and Putin, which span allegations of collusion or conspiracy during the 2016 election to Trump's very obvious servility before the former KGB and FSB chief at the Helsinki summit of July 2018, besides Trump's aforementioned withdrawal of U.S. support for the Syrian rebels, a move that may well have been coordinated with Russia as an affirmation of Trump's part, on Trump's part, of Assad's ghoulish campaign to retake the entire country. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Can you identify yourself? I didn't hear an introduction.
Sorry, yes. Javier Setnes. So
Okay.
I'm from Black Rose Rosa Negra.
Sorry, what?
Anarchist Federation. My name.
Oh, and you're in the Anarchist Federation?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
I'm just curious.
Okay. All right. So next we have Frida Afari from the Alliance.